other imperial language, which is Spanish. So, embodied sound o sonido encarnado, ¿no? Parte de la premisa de que la música es un fenómeno y un acto que ocurre en el cuerpo del ser humano, ¿no? Y en las sociedades, en la sociedad occidental y en las sociedades occidentalizadas, se ha desarrollado esta idea de que la música es algo que ocurre separado del cuerpo. Claro, yo sé que nosotros no suscribimos eso, pero nos encontramos en discusiones donde uno dice, pero esta persona piensa que la música es una cosa y que el cuerpo es otra, ¿no? ¿Qué consecuencia tiene esto? Que toda expresión musical centrada en el cuerpo, como es el flamenco, como es la bomba, como es el baile en general, se considera como algo problemático. No por la música que suena, sino por el cuerpo que la mueve. Entonces,
and I'm going to just interrupt and I'm going to just translate now. And I just also let you guys know that I did start to record the session. I forgot to do it earlier, but now I did it. Okay. So Noel is I will briefly translate, Noel, y te voy a interrumpir así para
no problem.
las ideas grandes, ¿no? He's talking about music as something which is not separate from the body, which we should not see as separate from the body. And he's saying that the thing that is problematic with these musics like flamenco, like bomba in Puerto Rico, it are the bodies that do them.
Actually, it happened contemporarily with the reggaeton. I mean, most of the problem with people is more with the lyrics and the body that moves when perrea, no? So in that sense, el estudio del musical humano durante el siglo XIX en Puerto Rico se puede dividir en dos concepciones del baile. Primero, el baile que domestica el cuerpo, como la contradanza, la danza, ¿no? Donde se formaliza el movimiento del cuerpo para dar a entender que está sometido a unas reglas. Y eso ellos lo contrastan, entonces, pensando y conceptualizando el baile de los africanos y de los afrodescendientes como expresiones corporalizadas de la naturaleza no racional del espíritu humano, ¿no?
I'm just going to interrupt there. So he's making two basic categories of dance. One is the kind of dances that domesticate the body, which are the sort of Eurocentric dances, right? And the others are the Afro-descended or the Black dances, which express the other ways of knowing, the other ways of intelligence that are not rational.
Sí, in a sense, it's more that the gaze of power of the white people who categorize those dances as not rationals or irrationals. You know, I don't care what those people think. I'm thinking that their dance is irrational, ¿no? ¿Cuál es la consecuencia? Que en el caso de Puerto Rico, el baile como expresión del musical africano y afrodescendiente se somete a dos fuerzas, ¿no? Primero, el Estado, cuando celebra sus fiestas, las trata de controlar, pero también las trata de presentar como, mira, también estos sujetos están celebrando el triunfo de la corona. Pero por el otro lado, el documento, y es mi argumentación, el documento también está dando una evidencia de que estas personas se están manifestando en su propio lenguaje musical, ¿no? ¿Qué quiere decir? Yo me apropio de esto y digo, fíjate cuán leales son las personas de Puerto Rico, que hasta los africanos y afrodescendientes bailan sus bailes para celebrar el cumpleaños del príncipe, la coronación de un rey. Pero no se dan cuenta de que ellos mismos están presentando una evidencia de que están viviendo en una sociedad multicultural donde los afrodescendientes están presentando el baile como agencia personal.
Yeah, so I'll just translate that really quick. So these dances that Noel studies in Puerto Rico are subject to two forces. On the one hand, the state and the crown want to appropriate these dances and show that, you know, isn't this nice that we're made up of so many different nations and we can all celebrate, you know, we can have all of these different nations participate in our national identity, right? And it's all subject to and kind of in deference to the crown. But at the same time, the musical language that these dances are of these dances is actually Africanist. It's actually Afro-descended. And so at the same time that it seems to pay homage to the crown and the state, it actually preserves these cultural components in all of their richness and all of their agency.
Sí. Entonces, para terminar, lo que resume todo este capítulo es que la sociedad puertorriqueña, especialmente el criollo blanco, lo que desarrolla es lo que yo llamo una oposicionalidad simbiótica, or a symbiotic oppositionality. What is that? No? Or like we say in Puerto Rico, with what you eat that. Y es que, por un lado, ellos presentan la danza criolla como el producto blanco de que representa la verdadera puertorriqueñidad. Y presentan las músicas africanas y afrodescendientes como el antípoda, ¿no? La bomba básica, o el holandés. Ese es el antípoda de la danza. Pero no se dan cuenta por qué yo llamo que eso tiene una relación simbiótica. Porque al fin y al cabo, hasta el siglo XX, el criollo blanco en Puerto Rico se envuelve en un debate de identidad. Y una de las cosas que dice, nosotros tenemos que librar a la danza de sus influencias negras de la bomba. Y uno dice, pero ¿qué es esto? Bueno, pues porque el patrón rítmico, por ejemplo, del holandés, que es patitita para patita pita tira para pa. Uno lo encuentra en la danza donde para pa pa pira tarira pa pa pi pa pa tira pi pa tira tarata pita te tata. Entonces, ¿qué ocurre? El criollo blanco tiene que enfrentarse que aún aquellas prácticas bailables que considera que domestica el cuerpo están dominadas y tienen elementos de aquellas cosas que ellos critican que son irracionales. What is the relation with this, with this and flamenco or any other Afro-diasporic dance? Is the body. Because when you see the identity debate in Spain or other countries with dances from the African diaspora, it is always the body. And las mujeres lo pagan doble. Porque no es solamente el cuerpo que se mueve, sino el género del cuerpo que se mueve, ¿no? Y entonces ahí lo dejo en un compás de espera con puntos suspensivos para que entonces mis compañeros encajen. Pero entonces espero la conversación.
Okay, I'm going to quickly try to translate some of that. So in Puerto Rico, the criollo blanco, or sort of the white gaze, if you want to think about it, we express is in a symbiotic oppositionality. What Noel said was, in Puerto Rico, we would say, "What do you eat that with?" Right? Like, what do you eat that with? Right? What's the side dish for that? Right? What's the thing that combines with that? The bomba in Puerto Rico is the antipode of the white danza. But until the 20th century, the white gaze was very involved in a discourse of liberating itself from the African and Afro-diasporic roots of its dances and music, which of course are based in the institution of slavery as we all understand. And the criollo blanco then, their dance practices, which they think are domesticated, are actually what they think of as irrational or Africanist. And finally, Noel just observes that women have a double whammy with all of this, because of course their bodies are not subject only to the idea of race, but also of gender. So thank you so much, Noel. That was really wonderful. Thank you very much. And now we're going to move to our next speaker. Now I was making notes and I lost my page. I turned the page over. So Antonio Cortijo Ocan es profesor de literatura medieval y renacentista en la Universidad de California en Santa Bárbara. Es autor de 50 monografías sobre historia religiosa, medieval y renacentista, teoría y retórica, construcción del Estado moderno, herejía e inquisición, así como sobre autores como Lope de Vega, Calderón de la Barca o Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Ha editado numerosas obras teatrales del siglo XVII, obras novohispanas y traducido numerosos autores catalanes al inglés, entre ellos Ramon Llull. His chapter, and I'm going to switch to English, and I'm just going to say that Antonio is a professor of literature and of medieval and Renaissance literature at the University of California in Santa Barbara. He's the author of 50 monographs on the religious history of the medieval and Renaissance period, on the theory of rhetoric, the construction of the modern state, heresy and Inquisition, and also on authors such as Lope de Vega, Calderón de la Barca, and Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. He has edited many works of theatrical works from the 17th century, works from the Americas, from the Spanish Americas, and has translated many Catalan authors to English, among them Ramon Llull. And his chapter in The Body Questions is Music in the Spanish Renaissance Theater, which summarizes some of the most relevant aspects of music and theater during the Spanish Renaissance, utilizing works by major authors of the Siglo de Oro, such as Lope de Vega, Moreto, Calderón, and Sor Juana, as examples of the interplay between secular and liturgical theatricals, and the importance of music as both evil and praiseworthy, popular and folkloric, and an all-encompassing spectacle of the senses. Take it away, Antonio.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to collaborate in the book, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'll take you on the last sentence that you indicated, saying that music was all-encompassing in the Spanish Renaissance and the Spanish Baroque. Actually, we could have gone all the way to the Middle Ages to say that music permeated that society in ways that probably we find very difficult to understand. I chose to focus on theater, since theater was probably the most important form of entertainment at the time. So allow me to read, a brief summary of my chapter. Music occupied the prominent role in Spanish Renaissance theater, either in profane or in sacred varieties. In fact, a major component of the entertainment provided by theater came in the form of music. Music was all-enveloping and reflected the supremacy given to the auditory among the senses at the time. According to Renaissance and Baroque theorization, there is a correspondence between music and passions and emotions. Music was prevalent during all parts of theatrical performances, reaching a climax in the operas and zarzuelas that developed in the 17th century and in many varieties of courtly theater. In the more popular performances that took place in what we call corrales de comedias, it was during the interludes or breaks between the acts, the theatrical acts, that entremeses were performed, a one-act brief place where music usually played a very relevant role. In comedias or comedies themselves, Lope de Vega is credited with having utilized lyric compositions. Some of them sang, definitely all of them played, with great success. In addition, the fin de fiesta, or the grand finale of these theatrical performances that sometimes took on average 4 hours. So this finale, called mojigangas, constituted a genre in itself that enjoyed extraordinary success once the major play of the theatrical performance ended. Again, music was a crucial component of this finale. And finally, the autos sacramentales, or religious plays, composed and performed during the feast of the Corpus Christi, in the music was not only instrumental to their success, but on many occasions, the music itself participated as a full-fledged dramatic character called musica in these plays. Music had a variety of functions in a Spanish theater. In the visual arts, occupied a prominent role in the Renaissance and Baroque cultures, and we can say that theater used music and songs to create an overpowering effect. For it represented a way to signify the desideratum, or the wish of harmony, the desire for harmony, and the strive for achievement of the golden mean that all humans must engage in and the universe must abide by. Popular music and popular songs played a paramount function in profane theater. Lope de Vega, probably the most important and most relevant Spanish playwright, comparable to what Shakespeare represents, for Anglo-Saxon theater, utilized famous songs and music to help create dramatic effects. Calderón, probably the second most important playwright, followed suit and included a large variety of popular lyric poetry in his comedias. Many of the romances, the ballads, or coplas, together with other forms of popular poetry, usually depicted country life and introduced folkloric motifs that allowed playwrights to contrapose the high culture associated to the city to the more popular peasant culture of rural settings and characters. In essence, they are part of the ample dissemination of music at the time, which can be seen in the popularity of the so-called cancioneros musicales, or musical songbooks, and attest to the prevalence of the musical as well as the visual at the time. In a different group of works that I deem particularly important by Lope de Vega, music serves a different purpose. In a cycle of plays that scholars have called the Flandes, about Flanders, or that they have called American, especially the Pizarro cycle of works written by Lope de Vega, music serves to characterize the other, the conquered or the subaltern, is demonized and analyzed from the conquering rational point of view by way of describing his customs as barbaric, particularly in the case of the American and the Black African or Guinea. In a different vein, now we're moving from the profane to the sacred. We're going to be talking about the autos sacramentales, or sacred opera, as has been termed by some scholars. This became the occasion for exploring the relationship between sacred music and dramaturgy at the theoretical level, and following Pythagorean, Augustinian, Boethian, and Neoplatonic tenets. Creation, the construction of creation, constituted a harmonic gradation that moved from nature and human to the cosmos at large and the celestial hierarchies, all of them intent as a chorus, working in unison on praising their maker. Agustín de Moreto, a follower, probably the most important follower of Lope de Vega, his theater offers us the opportunity to explore a different use of music on the stage. Critics have highlighted the masterful use of music in his theater as a way of creating an all-enveloping context in which the auditory plays a fundamental role for constructing dramatic tension. In Moreto's plays, music builds momentum throughout the plot and contributes to generating expectations and eliciting feelings in the audience. By using popular songs and music, doubtless known to the audience, he engages the public in an emotional and sensual atmosphere where music is seen as the main catalyst for action. The finale of the typical theatrical performance in Renaissance chorales, which, as I mentioned before, could last up to 4 hours, featured a musical and dance spectacle called Jácara. The music of the Jácaras was frequently based on popular tunes, to the great delight of the audience. Many Jácaras also made their way to temples and convents during the theatrical performances that took place in these sacred spaces, and that usually elicited the complaints of the religious hierarchy of the time. But that's what the audience wanted to hear. Many Jácaras also made their way, popular melodies and poems by authors such as Lope de Vega, Cáncer, León Marchante, Pérez de Montoro, Juan Inés, were adapted by important musicians of the time like Gómez Camargo, Bazara, Gómez de Zaragoza, Medina, or Ruiz de Samaniego. While the profane Jácaras featured an idealized world of the low society, crime, and brothels, its sacred counterparts formed part of the rifacimento a lo divino that permeates other genres of the time, including also, camera music, and that I cannot analyze here. Music was not only permeating all varieties of theater in Spain, also in Spanish America, music let its presence be felt in dramatic performances. Probably the most important author, the most emblematic author is Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Sor Juana was the chapel master in the Hieronymite convent of the city of Mexico. She was definitely knowledgeable of Neoplatonic theories of music, in addition to other forms of esoteric knowledge, mostly derived from her readings of a famous author at the time, the German Jesuit priest Athanasius Kircher. According to tradition, she was even the author of a musical theoretical treatise entitled El Caracol, which has not come down to us. Many of Sor Juana's villancicos can be seen as theatrical representations to be performed by her fellow nuns in the convent during the Christmas seasons and at other moments that were relevant throughout the liturgical calendar. The Villancico 4 is one of the ones that I analyzed by Sor Juana, attempts to synthesize a reconfiguration of music as a symbol and metaphor of perfect harmony and female legitimation through her harmonizing nature. As to sum all this, from the early inception of Spanish theater, which authors such as Encina, Gil Vicente, and its clear courtly context, these were authors that work in nobility households, music elicited a dual characterization as evil and praiseworthy. Music made its way in a variety of ways and forms to all theatrical genres during the 16th and the 17th centuries, both in Spain and in America. While Lope de Vega figures as the main promoter of the incorporation of music in comedy through the introduction of the popular and the folkloric as part of his dramatic theaters about what he called gusto, was the great figure who gave music an all-encompassing role, be it in his mythological comedies, in his operas, in his zarzuelas, and in particular in that spectacle of the senses, which was the autos sacramentales. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Antonio. So much wonderful, so much wonderful stuff in there. I've written down a whole bunch of questions. And you guys, let me just say a couple of things. We are recording this session, and so we'll see, perhaps this will find its way somewhere where you can go back. I know that I want to go back and listen to both of your presentations again so that I can get more and understand more about what you're saying and follow up. And of course, we hope that you'll buy the book. Oh, I should I'll put a link into where you can buy the book. I should have done that. I didn't think of that. All right, and so on to our third presenter. Miguel Ángel Vargas is co-director of the Theater and Drama section of Rome Archive EU, and is a Spanish artist with distinctive Andalusian Gitano roots stemming from Lebrija and Jerez. He earned his degree in art history from the University of Sevilla, where he is currently pursuing his PhD in contemporary history. He also studied theater direction at the Sevilla Institute of Theater in 1999. He participated in many shows as an actor, musician, director, producer, and technician. He defines himself as a poet because he tries to embody the authentic meaning from which the original Greek was derived, the one who creates, the one who begets and gives birth. His passion resides in the world of flamenco and theater. His heartfelt mission is to tell the stories of the Gitano field workers from Lebrija and to follow the commitment of the Teatro Lebrijano, an independent political theater company established in his hometown in the 1970s. In his chapter, Miguel Ángel proposes building an international reading of the crucial variety of national examples of Romani performers from Turkey to the USA in a crossed chronology. Connecting influences of the different contexts, we learn about the capacity of Romani artistic strategy to break genre limits and adapt the public discourses of alterity. Spanning the Romani Turkish puppet tradition, the Spanish Golden Age theater, and the 19th century teatro gitanesco or Gitano-esque theater, the royal masquerades in France, the enslaved Roma gestures in Wallachia and Moldavia, the work with animals in Roma circuses and bullfighting, fairs and carnivals, the theatricality of different Roma religious traditions, the experiences of the 19th and 20th century international exhibitions, and the relation between institutionalized and independent theater companies, Vargas reflects on the space that theatrical fiction and representation might have in the questioning of 21st century Romani identities. Roma performing artists inhabit a kind of double consciousness, Vargas argues, the inside and outside of modernity as a context of the social performativity of Roma identities. Regarding what is done inside, Vargas adds, there is, in theory, no documented testimony. Roma artists who participate in theatrical events where gypsy characters are interpreted, Vargas argues, speak to us about survival strategies, negotiation of public identity, and resistance. At the tense and alive intersection of Roma right and theatrical right, Miguel Ángel concludes, modernity does not see the Roma reality on stage, but Roma reality does reflect the fantasy of modernity. Take it away, Miguel Ángel.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm gonna speak in English, and I'll do my best, and then in the time for the questions, and then maybe we can switch to Spanish. Okay, so as Noel said, I'm gonna use the language of empire. So before proceeding, I want to recall a kind of little story, a kind of family story that I'm using a lot lately, in which I tell that my grandfather Juan, when they were living and working as field workers in the countryside, in the evening they used to read the newspapers they found or they have, and the Far West novels. So he used to read that for the other Gitanos. And my grandmother Micaela, who did not know how to read, he used to tell her own version of the news and her own version of the Far West novel. So, and I think it's better to do a homage to my grandmother Micaela, which means that I'm gonna speak more than reading. Okay, said that the chapter that I offer to this book, so again, Meira for including me in this fantastic book in which I feel overwhelmed, because I think sometimes I think I'm just someone who makes questions more than someone who is or who has a long story of publications. So my concern was how to try to build a new framework for to understand the Romani history of theater and dance. And as Noel said, I use performing art or artes escénicas in Spanish, meaning that I don't want to make a separation between dance and theater. They are both connected. So my concern was, okay, how do I build this story? There are so many different stories. There are so many different traditions, so many different languages. And what unite them? What's in the basic? So the second step was, okay, so let's try to think when was the moment in which Romani people, even Romani people from Spain, Gitanos from Spain, when was the moment in which they started to know about their Indian origin. And there is a coincidence of when this story was started to be spread, and the coincidence is that is through the colonization of India with the British Empire. So that's the moment in which several European intellectuals started to make the connection between some northern Indian languages and the language that was spoken by some Romani servants in Central Europe. From that moment, what we have is kind of an obsession with the study of the origins of, at that time they were called gypsies, as a way to not to make kind of to give dignity to the situations in which most of the Romani communities across Europe and America were having, but as a way to reinforce their position in academic society. So for me, it's important. So that's, for me, it's kind of a starting point, like questioning not only the idea that I don't know my own history, it's like that I know my history through all the people who study my history. So and then the third step is like what informs my questioning. So my question is, my position, like my current position as a Gitano Roma, supposed to be a scholar, artist, and cultural manager, living in reality, living in the officially poorest neighborhood of Spain, and trying to organize exhibitions, shows, many different artifacts in a cultural center located here, like 10 minutes from where I'm staying now, which is again in the ghetto, in the poorest ghetto of Spain. My commitment is like, okay, I think I want to open this question. I want to try to understand why. So what's the connection between the situation of the Gitano community, of the many Gitano communities in Andalusia, and the history of Romani performing arts? Because if we don't do that, then our research, our dialogues might stay in a kind of elite level, no? So, and then the next step is in my position in Sevilla, the next step is, okay, what's the space that flamenco occupies in all this questioning? For me, it's kind of overwhelming to see all this international group of people trying to make with connection to flamenco, which is like wonderful. But for me, it's also important to not to forget that the debate of the origins of flamenco has to go in relation with the explanation of the real situation of many communities, in concrete, many Gitano communities in Spain, because though they go together. So, as I was saying, what's the position that flamenco as a academic field, artistic field, political field occupies in all this questioning of the Romani performing arts? Well, it's quite a lot. So there's a problem with that. Like flamenco shapes our view. Flamenco give format to the way even in which we analyze and research our history, the history of the Gitano people. But at the same time, even being critical to this excessive space that flamenco occupies, I don't want to get rid of flamenco. It's like I won't abandon, I won't give up with flamenco. It's also my language. So it's that we have to get advantage of the space that flamenco have in all this questioning. So okay, so we have all these things that I'm saying. It's like what inform my position as a future or as a present researcher of the Romani, international Romani performing art, is because I'm affected by all these filters. No? So, and then the next step for me would be question like breaking the periodization, the classical periodization, not only of flamenco, not only of European history, but even like many decolonial thinkers do, like the very own idea of history of Europe. And there is a very simple statement that I think for me is kind of what it's leading me, like the Romani identity crystallizes before modernity. And so that helped us think, or at least to see the long history of the 5 centuries from 15th century until 2022, to see from a different point, which is all we see, all we live, all we perform, all we even sometimes all we are continuously reformulating is the gypsy fantasy of Europe. So we have to live with that. So there is there is no alternative unless we do it in a different space. And I'm gonna finish with this idea. So, as I said, I question the classical periodization of literature history, like this idea of Middle Ages, Renaissance, Baroque, and I think that it's not useful. I mean, it's like, as my Romani colleague said in a academic context of Romani, Gitanos, and Gitano bibliography in Spain, he was having a hot debate with a professor of the University of Las Canarias, and my colleague said, "Oh, this is white knowledge," and the professor asked, "What do you understand by white knowledge?" And my Romani Gitano colleague said, "I have read all your dead people. Have you read mine?" ¿No? En español suena mejor. Yo he leído a todos tus muertos. ¿Tú te has leído a los míos? So, for me, what is important, once that we have trying to deconstruct or take a different look to the classical periodization of the history, for me it's important to see the variety, the complex, rich variety of different examples of Romani performing art, and to see it through a metaphor that I use. Okay, I assume that it might sound like a bit weird to use the metaphor of the path, of the Romani path, no? Because it's very it's a trope. But what is important for me is not the idea that to use the metaphor of the path, which is from the crystallization of the Romani identities in the in the 11th century until today. What you have is what you do in one side on the other side of the path. So you can do the same show, the same ritual, the same whatever theatrical manifestation, and it would mean a really different thing inside the Romani community and outside the Romani community. So what we have is just the remains. It's just papers that reflect a tiny reality of that theatrical manifestation. So as Antonio said, theater was like crucial in 15th century. No, not only in 15th century, but I think across all the centuries, its shows are important. But what we have is just the tiny memory of that. That memory is coming, have arrived to us through papers, some paintings, some photographs, and what we do is a kind of a game of recreation of what the audience felt attending, watching these shows. No? So for me, what is a challenge for the future, not only Romani, but Romani and many different people who want to get closer to the history of the Gitanos or the Romani people. What for me is a challenge is to see this variety of examples through this new or a different approach, which is let's try to analyze from an interior vision, and that will help enrich the debate. And I will leave it at that.
So you guys in the audience, you get a flavor of what's going on in this book. It's really just quite incredible. Thank you so much, Miguel Angel, and thank you to all. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to open this up. We'll take about a half an hour for the three of you, Noel and Miguel Angel, Antonio, to sort of talk amongst yourselves. I don't know if you have questions for each other, but I do have a question for, I mean, as you can see, I've written down a whole bunch of notes and questions and things, but I also have a question and that I would ask you to please, when you first speak, if you wouldn't mind answering this question first. And that is, we did the conference in 2018, and I just wanted to know what you've been up to since then, and if you could just tell us a little bit about that as well. So I'll let you guys just, just jump all over it. However, or maybe should we go in order? Noel, do you want to start? Maybe just since we'll just go in order that way.
No problem. I think that what have happened is that since we made the presentation and finished our chapters for the book, we have been writing another book because I sense that my colleagues, they have gone through the same same experience of keep thinking about the implications of what we wrote and its relation. In my case, I have been continuing researching in what I call the Mediterranean, Atlantic, Caribbean connection. And it's a way to just what my colleague said about breaking the Eurocentric paradigm of timeline. Romper con el paradigma de que el medioevo, el renacimiento, el barroco, esa concepción temporal creada en el siglo XIX aplica por igual a todo el mundo. Aparte de que entonces, como presentaron muy bien, o sea, si seguimos las rutas de los seres humanos, que esa es mi nueva frase, la música no se mueve, la gente es la que se mueve, pues volvemos al asunto de cómo ese periodo de tiempo no cuadra si yo quiero incluir la periodización de los Roma a través de toda Europa y la diversificación y la colonización europea por los Roma. O sea, que es romper, una de las formas en que yo lo rompo, y perdonen que brinque aquí, es que los conceptos de colonización, de criollización y mestizaje siempre se ha utilizado para el subordinado. Como nosotros somos los que criollizamos, nosotros somos los que mestizamos, a nosotros es quienes nos colonizan. No hay ningún colonizador que no sea colonizado por el mismo proceso de colonización que desata. Y es...
And I'm gonna, I have to be able to translate that. I'm gonna lose it. Okay,
No,
Noel.
okay.
Okay, so he's talking about, what Noel is saying is that the Gitanos or the Roma more broadly, the concepts of mestizaje or sort of, like impurity, we should say impurity, impurity of blood, right? The one drop idea, right? Mestizaje, who does the mestizaje? It's always the subordinate who does the mestizaje, right? And it's always the subordinate who is quote unquote colonized, right? By the dominant, if you will, the dominant class. And what Noel is saying is that this actually goes the other way. It doesn't just go in one direction, and we need to break, as Miguel Ángel said, we need to break with that idea of this kind of Eurocentric, who is the colonizer and who is the colonized.
And also to round up what Antonio mentioned, I mean, the presence of Roma, Black people, Gallegos, and marginalized people in Spanish Siglo de Oro theater, and the use of their music is evidence of the colonizing of the colonizer. Because you have Mateo Flecha, with Sansabe Yagugurumbe, Alangadanga Gugurumbe, you have white people like Lope de Vega, Cervantes, including music of the supposed subordinates, but that is evidence that they were colonized. Because when Mateo Flecha el Viejo includes the guineo, it's because he knew how to dance it. And even though it's a double-edged sword, because it's the invention of the blackface and all that, but still is the evidence of that. And I think that my question, or at least el pie forzado for my colleagues, is then how we get together and make that global overview of these processes. Because in the case of the theater, the success of the Spanish theater in the Americas is because the Mexicas, the Tlaxcalas, and other groups, they have their own theater tradition with singing. So when they saw the Spanish making their own theater, they say, oh yeah, we understand that. We don't understand the Castilian, but we understand what they are doing on stage because we do it ourselves. Yeah. So my question will be, okay, how we then go after this and start talking about this global phenomena that bring the Roma diaspora, the African diaspora, and also the process of creolization in Europe.
So Noel, let me jump in. I'll go next. Trying to explain. What I've been working on. I mean, I've been working on different things, but one of the most important ones is a study on minorities from the 12th to the 17th century. And I say from the 12th to the 17th century, and I'll insist on what Miguel Angel was saying, the need of doing away with the periodization, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, that serves no purposes. It serves no purposes, from a global perspective, from one that is not Eurocentric. It doesn't even serve a purpose from a Eurocentric perspective. Because, this periodization of medieval, Renaissance, and Baroque is just not explaining what's going on at the time. We experience, this is the topic of my research, we experience at the end of the 12th century, beginning of the 13th century, the constitution, the creation of what we, scholars have called a persecuting society. A society in which difference is not accepted anymore, and in which the concept of heresy is introduced in order to characterize the other. That is the moment, curiously enough, in which for the first time, we hear of the appearance of the Roma people in Europe, together with many other groups, many of them, coming from the East, who all of a sudden are being characterized. They have been, surviving on the fringes. They have been surviving, at the border, like all those Germanic tribes, of the Roman Empire. But this is the first time that this is the first time that they enter history. That's the first time that we hear about them. It's not that they have a historical entity, but the first time that we hear about them are as marginalized people, because a new discourse has been created that terms these people heretical, strange, other, weird. So for instance, in the case of Spain, we know that the Roma people, by the way, if you go to the chat, I included, I'm the director of a journal that is called Humanista. If you go to a chat, I gave you the web address of a book we just published this year. It's a volume 8 of something that we call Minorías ebooks. And there's a great article about Germán Navarro on the history of the appearance in Hispanic and European cultures of the term gypsy for the first time. Insisting on what Miguel Angel was saying, actually, the first time that we hear, about the Egyptians as related to gypsies is around the end of the 14th century, when there's, a little city called Moldo in the Balkans, in which, there's a little neighborhood that is called Little Egypt, and that's where the Roma people resides. And we know the neighborhood, as Roma people. Anyway, very interesting what you said, Noel. In the case of America, it is even more interesting, to analyze the inclusion of music, especially on the part of the religious establishment. They realized from very early on that the only channel that they had, to actually communicate with indigenous people, or probably not the only one, but the most important one, was through music. In the case of Mexico, you have the example of the tocotín, that also Sor Juana, includes on some of the villancicos. And it is particularly relevant in a genre that is called Jesuit theater, written in native languages. This Jesuit theater, written in native languages, mostly by native people who had been trained by the Jesuits in Castilian, but they wrote in their native languages, constitute mostly musical performances at the time. Of course, with the religious content, with the attempt, to indoctrinate, the native peoples and so on and so forth. But what is interesting for me, is that the genre that they used. It was theater and mostly music. And that's particularly, talk about, the colonizer being colonized. They were assuming that right from the beginning. So, Anyway, that's what I'm working on.
I would recommend Antonio and Noel and the audience to have a look to the work by Romani scholar Adrian March. He's a Romani child, Romani person, like from England, but he wrote his thesis from, he said, like from one of the ages of Europe. So he wrote his thesis from Istanbul. What he does is like the questioning, not on the questioning of the historiography of the Romani. And for him, it's crucial to understand the complexity of Ottoman Empire in the crystallization of Romani identity. So the first...
That's crucial.
Crucial. And the first time that the word Egyptian appears is in the Ottoman Empire, not in Europe.
Exactly. And
that changes many things also. And then he also makes a really crucial reflection on the importance of Islam, which is something that normally doesn't appear in all these debates. No? And then I was also going to bring kind of a historical episode that will, I don't know if Noel knows, but it's, for me, it's very important, and it's connected to this idea that you were explaining, that like how the Spanish Empire could show his own diversity. No, as part of the richness of the empire, they were proud of showing the diversity of those perceived and built as others. No? So, and it's the episode of the Mascarada de la Nación Gitana of 1746. For me, it's crucial, that episode, because if you go to the description of, okay, what we did. So it was there was a new king, Ferdinand VI. So in many cities of the empire, there were celebrations to welcome the new king. So, and then there were, at that time, in Sevilla, there were two big mascaradas. One is very known because there are paintings by Domingo Martinez in Museo de Bellas Artes, and many of the current books of the region of flamenco are like they use like little parts of these paintings, in which they were these 9 big paintings reflect the mascarada of the Fábrica de Tabacos. But the ones that by the Gitanos, which is la Mascarada de la Nación Gitana, which I think it might have been one of the first time that the word Nación Gitana appears together. What they did is something for me like shocking. okay, what they did. So they show so the theme of the Mascarada de la Nación Gitana, to make a homage to the new king. They were talking about the conquering of Mexico. So, and they did a kind of big parade, big trolley with Moctezuma y un coro de mozas gitanas. And another trolley with, so it's like, okay, what the hell is Gitanos doing with the Mexico and the conquering? Okay, so you understand this if you think that 3 years later, only 3 years later, this same Gitanos who had the capacity, the logistical capacity of doing this big masquerade, these same Gitanos were put in jail in the Prisión General de Gitanos. And in 1752, these same Gitanos founded the Gitano Brotherhood of Sevilla, which is a way of another show. So it's like in the Mascarada, they need to do that to show that they were good citizens, because they were not they were not considered Spanish citizens. So, and then once they were put in jail and they found a way to get out, because they were those who, the one with more influences. So they created the Gitano Brotherhood of Sevilla as the only way to apply for citizenship, which was through the manifestation of Catholic faith. So it's kind of, so you see, like the same people, so they were conscious of this game, like you were saying, like we try to colonize the colonizer. Yeah, but at the end, which I think that we have to discuss, is at the end it's a power relationship.
Yeah, yes, it is a power relationship. And what is wonderful about what you just said is that in the same time with the celebration of Ferdinand VI in Puerto Rico, the narrative que relata las festividades en Puerto Rico presenta una obra de teatro presentada por pardos o por mulatos libres que son bailarines, o sea, dejan entender que son actores, bailarines y cantantes, y que después de la obra van a la casa del gobernador, la actual fortaleza, para rendirle homenaje al gobernador, obviamente el gobernador como representante del rey que acaba de ser coronado, pero que lo presentan como que, espérate, el gobernador está recibiendo a estos mulatos dentro de su residencia, y obviamente narran de que las actrices mulatas le hacen un homenaje y le ofrecen flores, etcétera, etcétera. Pero por eso en mi artículo enfatizo cómo en estas manifestaciones estatales se hacen representaciones teatrales, pero que estas representaciones teatrales tienen para mí la belleza del ser humano, que es la contradicción, ¿no? En medio de esa manifestación abierta del poder estatal, de que nosotros somos los que mandamos, nosotros somos la norma hegemónica, no se puede dar esa fuerza, ese poder hegemónico en un 100%, y por entre las grietas, entonces entran estas personas y dejan un testimonio de que tienen su propia agencia, aunque sea dentro del contexto de la manifestación del poder estatal. Así que definitivamente acabamos de escribir otro libro.
Yep, I know, and I'm going to translate that before I lose it. Before you answer, Miguel Ángel, let me just translate. So Miguel Ángel was talking about the 1746 Mascarada de los Gitanos, which has to do with the coronation of Felipe VI
Ferdinand VI.
And of course,
Ferdinand VI.
Fernando,
Fernando
perdóname,
VI,
sí, sí, Fernando VI. And this is, of course, 1746, the great roundup, the Gran Redada de los Gitanos, was a genocidal state action in 1749. So this is right around that time, right? And what Noel is saying is that at the same time in Puerto Rico, as he discusses in his article, there were pardos libres, which is mixed race people, let's just say, right? Mixed race people who were going to the house of the governor to pay homage to the governor in music and dance, of course. And I'll just say that, and then I'm going to let you jump in, Miguel Angel, but I do have a question here, right? Which is what Noel is saying is that there is this, it seems like it's paying homage to the government. It seems like it's, obeying all of the rules of the kind of state power, if you will, and what their standards are. But in fact, it's contradicting what it seems to say, right? So it sort of seems to agree while actually disagreeing, or it seems to acquiesce while actually resisting. And I think that's a theme that runs through everything. And Miguel Angel, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, Antonio, you want to answer first, or
yeah? Well, I was gonna add something to the conversation. It's very interesting in the case of the Spanish Empire that there's usually, a very complex misunderstanding of the way that empire was constructed. There's not a lot of Spanish in the Spanish Empire, even when it comes, to the military. Let's say, like the big tercios of the 16th century. The tercios were not composed of Spaniards. Only 10% of the Spaniards, composed the tercios. The other ones, were flamencos, were Germans, were, one of the main difficulties that an empire has when it's being built is how to incorporate the difference. And this is not something that, happened to the Spanish Empire. This happened, for instance, to the Roman Empire. And the way they did that, the Romans, was by doing something that nobody else was doing, which was incorporating the other gods, the gods of the subjected people, into the religious pantheon of the empire, so that the other could feel somehow, of course, we're talking about the upper echelons of society, the aristocratic, Celts, the aristocratic, Iberians, which were the ones that were being, educated into Roman values and that were being sent to Rome. But at least, those ones could be somehow feel identified with that new entity called the Roman Empire. Something similar, happened with the Spanish Empire. Something similar, again, happened with many other empires. That explains, Miguel Angel, you were talking about, this mascarada in 17th century. Remember, that's following a pattern that had been created 200 years before, when the first confraternity of Black people was also created in Seville. And that dates, back to the first 2 decades of the 16th century. What better way of incorporating of making a person who is considered the other a loyal member of the new entity called empire than to incorporate him into the religious spectrum of that empire, of that city, Seville. Remember, Seville in the 1520s, is like the center of the universe.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about just a simple city. And the Black people that are residing in the city all of a sudden have a confraternity as important as other confraternities. Now, the first Black virgins,
but I think
also date from this time. So, for me, it's very important how empires have to deal, number one, with the difference, and number one, with heterodoxy. Now, the subjective people have also a way to fight against that inclusion into the empire that deep down implies that they lose their own voice. And the way they do that, is through many different ways. Remember, in America, we have the case of Guamán Puma de Ayala, with that book that he addresses, to the emperor, and that in fact, is basically exalting, is basically impressing, upon the colonizer, the fact that the colonized also has a history, also has a cultural relevance, and so on and so forth. For me, what is really interesting is that interplay between heterodoxy and orthodoxy, a way of being incorporated into the empire, while at the same time keeping your own identity. That's a struggle that we see throughout that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's that, but I think what Noel is trying to say, or if I understood well, is what Yudiel Spinoza would call the fantasmagoria de la modernidad. It's like modernity creates phantasmagorias of the different minorities, and then the minorities like take these images and transform it sometimes into their own image to give it like to reverse. En español sería como que la modernidad crea la fantasmagoría, una imagen que no corresponde con la falsa. Pero las minorías la cogen para devolverla.
Sí.
Y darle un sentido diferente. Claro, y eso a mí me lleva si lo traemos al mundo del flamenco, a la figura del agitanado, que es una figura para mí complicada. Cuanto menos complicada.
Mucho más tarde, ¿no? O sea, sobre todo en el 18, a la hora de los bailes
Pero es en este momento cuando aparece. Es en este preciso momento, en la segunda mitad, el second half of the 18th century,
el 18.
And that figure, the agitanado, which is in the base of the afición. For me, the problem is not only to make the history of the afición of the 19th century until today. Okay, that's something that we can do. For me, the challenge is how all this obsession with the Gitano image affected the Gitano people. How that affected to the Romani people. That's something that we still have to consider.
Well, it's a way of incorporating. If we try to apply it, I mean, it's very interesting what you say. It's not disagreeing with the main point that I was presenting. To some extent, my wife is Canadian, and I've lived in Canada for many years. And for me, it's tantamount. The problem that we're having, with the not only the identification or the construction of the identity of the minority from the point of view of the colonizer and from the point of view of the minority itself. For me, a way to bring that topic, to the present is the following. What is the difference when dealing with immigration? Between the concept of the melting pot that existed in the US and the idea of interculturalidad or interculturality that exists in Canada. Because the two have to be dealing with the same problem, which is there's a lot of immigrants that are arriving to the country. The two of them have to be dealing, with the concept of identity. What are we as a nation, as Americans or as Canadians? And it is absolutely crucial to determine how that construction of immigration and national identity affected the immigrants themselves. The melting pot, tends towards somehow losing your own cultural identity. You feel obliged to melt into the pot, which is a way of losing your identity. Being integrated, that's called integration. In the case of Canada, there's no that push doesn't exist. Which means that, many of the cultural minorities of Canada still to this day, keep their own very crucial identity. To some extent, the conceptualization of the Gitano could follow that pattern. I mean, what forces are they being subjected to that makes them rethink their own identity because they're being pushed to it? That's a crucial fact.
I think that a way to give form to that problematization is to return to the part of the dance. Because precisamente esa corporeización de identidad que se baila, que se musica, convirtiendo música en un verbo, precisamente es lo que encarna esa problematización. Porque por un lado está, por ejemplo, el caso de puertorriqueños que residen en Estados Unidos, que ahora están utilizando los bailes con bombas o con tambores como una forma de reafirmación de identidad. ¿no? Y es este baile que se actúa performativamente y abiertamente junto con la música. Pero al mismo tiempo, ¿no? En otras épocas, haciendo un brinco temporal, precisamente yendo otra vez al siglo XVIII, había esa dualidad, ¿no? Ahora, anteriormente la bomba era criticada. En Puerto Rico fue prohibido bailar danza en público, bomba en público, al principio del siglo XX. Sin embargo, ahora es una marca de identidad y ahora el reggaetón está pasando exactamente por el mismo proceso de ser discutido, de ser marginalizado o de ser criticado como una expresión corporal que debe prohibirse. Así que no es
y a la vez
para
se construye la idea del buen reggaetón, como la idea del buen gitano.
Con el tiempo vendrá eso, ¿no?
Sí, sí.
Como ocurrió con el bolero y con otros géneros musicales.
La domesticación del reggaetón, la domesticación del gitano.
La domesticación, o lo que también se puede llamar que ocurre en España con el flamenco y con los gitanos, que es la folclorización. Es una forma de domesticarlo y traerlo dentro de la conceptualización de nación.
So this is an amazing conversation, and I'm going to just interrupt for a second I'm actually going to interrupt to try to translate what Noel just said, and then I'm going to pose a question to all three of you, and then we're going to open it up to questions for the audience. But as you can see, there's like no shortage. We're going to be, if we're short on anything, it's going to be time today, right? It's just amazing conversation. And Noel was saying that this has to do with the corporealization, right? The embodiment, that's the word, right? The embodiment of the dance, which holds, and the musicalization, right? The body-made music, right? Is what we're really talking about here. And of course, he was mentioning how, the bomba was prohibited in the beginning of the 20th century. And now it's like a sign of national identity. And, now the reggaeton is like, a little bit sketchy, or maybe there's a good version of the reggaeton and a bad version of the reggaeton, just like there's a good version of the gitano and a bad version of the gitano, right? But I want to just jump in here with a sort of a comment / question, which is that from my perspective of editing all of these chapters, these amazing chapters, and sort of seeing how they fit together, one of the things that I think that that I think that the Roma people teach us about is how to conceptualize an identity which is not tied to a nation state, right? So how do we conceive of an identity that in itself is, in that it is not tied to a nation state, is already in some ways decolonizing, an act of decolonization, if you will. And, I just want to bring it back to, the title of the book, which is The Body Questions, right? And I think that, one of the things that we're all sort of touching on, and I love, what Miguel Angel, what you say about the inside and the outside, because I'm totally with you on that, as you know. And, those of you in the audience that are flamencos know very well that in the mid 20th century, there was a very important figure named Antonio Meira, who is seen as kind of, promoting what is now roundly criticized as this theory that, that there within, Roma families, there were cultural traditions that are at the root of flamenco, right? And, nowadays people really criticize that, but I think that we need to bring that back, because I think that, and this is what, I'll just make the connection, which is my connection to this work, which is through Black performance theory. And I think that Black performance theory really understands this, because as Miguel Angel was saying, the gitanos have to perform with the flor y la peineta. There's no way of escaping that stereotype when you perform. So you have to work, as Noel is saying, you have to work in the cracks. You have to like work in the, and what I've been calling this is like the skepticism to the surface. I think there's there's a skepticism to the surface, which comes out of, you know, not Black performance theory, but from Black artists, right, in the United States, let's say, and throughout the diaspora, right, of being forced into these boxes and yet finding a way, as Houston Baker Jr. says, of completely transforming, you know, what is a sort of a stereotype, cliched form into something that is rich and alive and speaks on multiple levels that contradict each other, as you said, Noel. So I guess I would just open it up to the three of you, if you wanted to make a comment about that, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience.
Bueno, simplemente lo resumiría con una expresión radical, o sea, sin cuerpo no hay música. Punto. O sea, no punto en el sentido de que se cerró la discusión, sino punto, vamos a discutirlo. O sea, porque en ocasiones yo mismo tengo que como que autoflagelarme, decir, bueno, todavía en la forma en que estoy hablando parte de la premisa de que el cuerpo y la música son dos cosas aparte, ¿no? Y como le digo a mis estudiantes, la música no son las moléculas vibrando en el aire, ¿no? La música es el cuerpo actuando, cantándola, tocando el instrumento, bailándola, escuchándola y bailándola, o llevando el tiempo. O sea, no existiría, si no existe la especie humana, no existe la música.
Yeah, and I'll just translate that. So music is the body, right? Music is not the molecules vibrating in the air, as Noel says to his students. Music is what happens in the body. Music is the body. And I would add to that, Noel, that music is the knowledge of the body that's passed down from generation to generation through time. And that's a different kind of knowledge, as we were talking about earlier, than the sort of Eurocentric, you know, your dead and my dead, right? Whose dead are we talking about, right? I know who my dead are in my body.
Okay, for me, the answer or the challenge for the future would be try to conceptualize or even create. I think it's more important create it than make concept. To create something that is not representational, because representation itself is a problem. Once you represent an identity, you are betraying the very delicate nature of identities, which is ambiguous or not too fixed, or something which is to be done, not done. So that's one thing. Like, we need to think in not representational identities, and then that would take me to the obsession with visibility. Sometimes I tell to my Romani peers, activists, like really in the realms of culture, they state in public, we need to work toward the visibility of Romani culture. And I say, I wish we were invisible, because being visible is what has made us sick, because we have to fit in the construction.
In a box.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So for me, as an artist, thinker, or creator, or whatever, for me it's a challenge to try to think, analyze things from an outside of the representation framework. And that would help not only the Hispano people, but Black people, Muslim people, because modernity is visibility. That's the main problem for me.
Well, I would insist on that when talking about my interest, Miguel Angel. I would say that for me, you know, as a historian, that's the perspective that I can offer. I have a main problem with the idea of a box, which is, you know, what you call the conceptual frame or framework in which, you know, you try to put different things. And for me, one of the main problems with identity in the way that has been understood is that we are experiencing right now, you know, more of a tendency towards describing identities as something fluid. going back to the Roman Empire, I'm a classicist, so I'm always looking back at the Roman Empire. One of the main problems with the history of the Roman Empire is that we have been told that in the 5th century, because the Romans created a border that basically kept them safe as a buffer zone from the Germanic barbarian people, there was all of a sudden in the 5th century an invasion that took over the Roman Empire. That is completely false. I mean, that is absolutely, completely, 100% false. The Romans had become barbarians little by little over the last 4-5 centuries, because many of these so-called barbarians, had been entering the border, which became something incredibly fluid, had been, permeating the Roman society. And at some point, it was just a natural process for these so-called barbarian people to just take over. It's to some extent, something similar. I also, with my students, talking about, these old periods of time, I always have to bring them to the present. Otherwise, they cannot relate to those old periods of time. And I'm basically telling them, listen, this is something similar to what is happening to Latino, Hispanic people in the US. They're taking over little by little. This is a process that has been, taking, 50, 60, 70, 80 years. There will come a moment in which, how can you say that those are Hispanic people as opposed to American people? American people are just going to be those Hispanic people. And then they will be the barbarians that have taken over the Roman Empire. So for me, it's very interesting, how these different, the tendency that we're experiencing right now of many of these so-called minorities that are trying to rethink their fluid identities, within the mainstream society. And that is the struggle, that is the fight that they are undergoing. All of a sudden they have realized that they have an identity and that their identity is fluid, or it should be something fluid. That's similar to what you're saying, that, that they should avoid visibility. Is to say they should be embracing fluidity, which is a way of escaping stereotyping to some extent.
In 2 weeks, Antonio, in Sevilla, we will have a seminar organized by the Ministry of Culture of Spain, which is called Cultura y Ciudadanía. And I'm part of the academic team who have assessed the program. And it will be in Real Fábrica de Artillería de Sevilla, which is like 500 years factory building weapons, not only for the Spanish Empire, but for the whole planet.
For the whole planet.
From 1565 until 1993. So it will be the first time that the Ministry of Culture make a kind of an exercise of, is it possible to decolonize Spanish institutions, like Spanish cultural institutions? So for me, it's important to understand how that, and that's a long, like a lifetime work. For me, it's important to connect weapons and visibility in art, because they go together. They go together. Like you force people to get visible with cannons and arms.
Pointing guns at them,
Yeah. So who are you? It's because you are you because they have a weapon.
Well, who are you because you're in front of my gun?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You're right. So
you're visible. Yeah. Wow. Amazing. Okay, I am going to, I see, I want to just welcome Clara Morachinoy here, and who will be presenting in who's one of the wonderful, brilliant authors of this book, and will be participating in another one of these conversations. And I would just invite you to make comments, to leave questions, to leave comments. I think you can unmute yourself. So I see that we have a question from Aureli. Aureli, if you want to just unmute yourself and turn your camera on, or ask your question.
Hola. Hi.
Hola.
Hola, gracias por... yo soy de Montreal, de Canadá.
Ajá.
Y...
Quebecois.
sí, québécoise. Y yo
My
bailo
wife is québécois.
así. Ah, bueno. Es lo
Ajá.
québécois. Also, we had a history of naming ourselves colonized by the Anglophone.
Mhm.
And now,
Mhm.
so I have a question. Well, it's just interesting to I just wanted to make a point of Miguel Angel Vargas talked about
Mhm.
the Los Muertos in the post-colonialism like education of Canada. Now we really talk about the narrative of native people,
Mhm.
and it's really interesting because it's a non-written history, and
Right.
so that's why the question of identity. I don't have any question about that. I was just pointing that it's also add with how to study the non-written history, and so
Mhm.
that's just a talk, a pensamiento sobre esto.
Ajá.
I really am looking forward to read the book, and I follow all of you, all your studies, and thank you so much for making that available, all this rich work.
Mhm.
Okay, so what can I add? Like I mean, that was a kind of very tense situation, but at the end, it resulted in a kind of very friendship way, you know, like the big professor and the Romani poor, really poor academic or PhD student in a university in Portugal. No? So at the end, is also a power relationship. So and it's also a different way to approach history. So I do history because I want to learn my my dead people to as a way to take them for the future. Other people they just count dead bodies, which is okay, but it's a different approach.
And I want to jump in too and just add that,
Oh.
one of the basic premises and one of the basic questions that we're asking in this book is how can we use embodied knowledge, the knowledge of being practitioners, the knowledge of, that we inherit from our families, and how can we incorporate that knowledge into the academic discourse? And Miguel Angel, I understand what you're saying about, that we want to avoid representation, we want to avoid the traps of like accepting those premises, but at the same time, my feeling is that if we don't enter into dialogue with those institutions, then they'll just exist on parallel tracks, and the power balance will not be shifted. So, that's my thought about that. Yeah.
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 A mí me gustaría apretar un botón del pánico. Eso es una frase que me inventé con mis estudiantes. Porque mi entendimiento es que los seres humanos vivimos en representación y por la representación de los otros. O sea, y esto tiene que ver con neurociencia, la teoría de la mente, etcétera, etcétera. ¿No? Y para mí lo radical es que yo tengo que entender que mi comprensión de mí mismo, o sea, mi identidad y del grupo al cual creo que pertenezco, me construyo que pertenezco, es en base a una representación en pelea con aquel que dice que mi identidad no es pertinente.
O no existe.
O que no existe, ¿no? Entonces, en ocasiones podemos desarrollar, ¿qué es lo que ocurre? No estoy hablando de un pecado capital, estoy hablando de simplemente naturaleza humana. Caemos en el síndrome del némesis, ¿no? Donde nuestra identidad la encerramos en aquello, en nuestra pelea con el otro, ¿no? Con el que trata de definirme. Entonces, eso lo descubrimos, me imagino que se da dentro de los Roma, pero dentro de cada grupo que tiene que pelear por su visibilidad, con los los cambios generacionales, ¿no? Una primera y segunda generación de puertorriqueños en Nueva York no se identifica como puertorriqueño como sus padres o sus abuelos se identifican como puertorriqueños. Claro, el trauma para los colonizadores es cuando ellos descubren que ellos pasan por los mismos procesos de depresión identitaria en esos aspectos, ¿no? El norteamericano o el canadiense blanco de ahora no se piensa canadiense como se pensaba canadiense su abuelo o su bisabuelo. Y yo creo que eso es algo que deberíamos considerar y creo que aún, aunque esté problematizando lo que Miguel presentó, pero que es algo que se tiene que plantear, ¿no? La construcción de la identidad y, en mi caso, cómo esa construcción de la identidad se da en el baile. Y por eso los jóvenes que están bailando bomba hoy día no la están bailando de la misma forma que sus padres o sus abuelos, porque en algunos casos esos jóvenes los están aprendiendo de cero porque crecieron o fueron criados como yo fui criado, de que eso es música de negros que no tiene ningún tipo de valor cultural y que para tú ser puertorriqueño no necesitas aprender a bailar bomba, ¿no?
Claro, muy interesante, ¿no? Mi mujer es profesora de psicología, estudia estereotipos. Y es muy interesante cómo a veces el estereotipo, que tiene una función, nosotros asumimos exclusivamente negativa, en realidad desde un punto de vista psicológico no funciona así.
Es arquetípica.
El estereotipo, claro, el estereotipo en ocasiones lo que hace simplemente es que te señala como un otro, como un diferente, como un distinto, como un no incorporado. Pero a veces esa población estereotipada utiliza ese estereotipo, lo que tú estás mencionando con la idea de bomba, utiliza ese estereotipo para redefinirlo de una manera positiva. Y es como si lo lanzara de vuelta, como si fuera una especie de proyectil que lo lanza de vuelta contra el que le ha estereotipado y que lo reorganiza de una manera distinta. En fin, la población negra en Estados Unidos también lo ha hecho, y en fin, muchas otras poblaciones marginales, marginadas, minoritarias, como se le quiera llamar. Es el modo como suele funcionar también el estereotipo. Ya digo, a veces de modo positivo, a veces de modo negativo.
I'll just translate a tiny bit of that, just talking about, Noel is making the point that, representation is something that's kind of basic to human psychology, right? We differentiate ourselves from our mother, when we're born, sort of thing, right? So it's, we're always defining ourselves in relation to how we see ourselves through the eyes of others, and kind of, what is that, what is the gaze of the other, and how do we, as Antonio says, how do we throw it back at the, if a gaze is colonizing you, how do you throw it back and sort of, recolonize them, as Noel was saying also. So, and it's interesting because Noel, you started your comment about, I want a panic button, right? And that's exactly what Toni Morrison talks about, right? She talks about the anxiety of white people, about losing their identity, right? We're living, some of you guys are not in the United States right now, but people that are in the United States right now know that we're living through just some incredibly terrifying moments, and it has everything to do with, white anxiety. It really does. And I think we have, I want to just, perdón. No, I just want to say one thing quickly. It's 52, and we will finish at 2. So we have time for probably one more question, but I want to just answer Carolina's iPhone question, which is there a way to hear this talk again? And just to remind you that this is being recorded, and if we do have participation, if we have permission from the 3 speakers, which I think we might, then we can share this. I can share this. I'm going to put this. I'll share it on YouTube. I'll put it on YouTube, and I will send you guys the link, because I know for me too, I want to listen to it again. There's so much here, so much wonderful stuff here. So I think we have time for one more question or one more comment. Yota, I see that you put your camera on. Did you want to say anything? Or yeah, and Juanita, yeah, Toni Morrison, she's the one. Yeah. Does anybody have anything else to say? Yeah, Coco.
Hi. I'm based on Athens, Greece. Thanks a lot for the ideas and the thoughts. I have to process them. I was just writing that down. Looking forward for the next talk and reading the book. Identity issues for me are, being born in Greece from grandmothers and grandfathers from many places around, coming, as immigrants. And anyway, those ideas are very interesting to me, and I will be following your next actions.
Thank you so much. And I just put the link to buy the book, which I hadn't done before, into the chat. So just FYI. Any final thoughts? Juanita, you want to jump in?
I don't have a question really, and it's lots of information. I made a lot of notes, and it is a bit to process. But it's been a fascinating discussion. I'm so glad I came on. I really enjoyed the speakers and listening to these very different point of view and information. It's really good. Thank you so much.
Final thoughts from our three. Should we go just make a round of final thoughts from the three protagonists? Want to start, Noel, since you're the first in order?
Bueno, reiterando lo que dije, o sea, como historiador social y cultural de la música, yo siempre hago énfasis en, primero, el ser humano. O sea, si no existe el ser humano, yo no puedo estudiar la música. Y la música para mí es una ventana a una forma de saber. Y obviamente esa forma de saber siempre va a ser corporal. Music in the flesh. Y ese, para mí, si van a leer mi capítulo, por eso lo titulé Embodied Sound, porque ese es el metaconcepto que domina la explicación y la historización de la música en el siglo XIX en Puerto Rico.
And I'll just translate that really quickly. The basis and the fundamental premise of Noel's work is that music is embodied, sound is embodied, and it really all comes out of the human body.
Antonio?
Oh, I'm sorry. Fascinating, amazing discussion. Music, has been playing a crucial role in our cultures and in every single culture, ever since the creation of the human race, in what pertains in particular to the Roma people. And as Miguel Angel says, music is fundamental to their identity. But let's say identity, in quotation marks.
Yeah.
At some point, Miguel Angel was not going to be able to even talk or to even say anything.
No, don't say that.
Every term, is being questioned. No, but you know what I mean. Definitely, being something crucial for their identity and for their way of thinking about themselves. It's something that definitely deserves scholarly scrutiny on our part, to see if there's something that we can contribute to that discussion.
Yeah, same here. I mean, for me, it's been an honor to. If I can offer something, it's this idea that we need to know and research more. In my case, is I hope future researchers of flamenco have a different, more knowledge on the history of the Romani people, and that knowledge should also be connected to the realities of the Romani people nowadays. So that's the only thing that I could try to offer to the audience. Like we cannot forget that we are talking about real people.
Yeah, amen. Well, thank you all so much for coming. Jota, do you have something else you wanted to say?
Can I add just an information if it's when I started learning flamenco in 1995, my teacher was telling me that flamenco was an art form that gypsy people brought from India to Spain, which is totally not accurate. No, it's wrong. Okay, well, but just an information about how I was, you know, how what information I had as a student about flamenco, late 90s in Greece.
There's a lot to learn.
So
That was
much
fascinating a
wonderful.
lot during that time.
Yeah.
Did you hear me? Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming, everyone, and to be continued. Don't forget that there is another book talk of these in this series on October 30th. It's going to be at the same time. So wherever you are, it's going to be at the same time it was today. And it will actually be the same Zoom link. And I will send you all of you that registered, I will send this information all out to your email. So I'll email it to you.
Gracias a ti, Meira, por la iniciativa y por esta magnífica moderación de
I know it is
los tres
magnificent.
monstruos.
It is. It's a magnificent conversation, really just awesome conversation. So thank you all. Thank you for coming. And thank you, Miguel Angel. Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Noel, for your participation. And we'll see you guys all soon, okay? And thank you, Clara, for coming. And everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay, gracias.
Bye.
Chao, chao.
Estamos en contacto.